Hey, what's up guys, Totallydubbed here, and today I'm doing a video review on the BenQ EX3203R. Now this is a 32-inch 1440p HDR monitor that runs at 144 Hz and has FreeSync 2. Now this isn't the only monitor in the market to offer all of these features. It's very similar to the Samsung monitor which I've previously reviewed. Link will be down in the description below. I reviewed the 27 and the 32-inch models. Now HDR is still in a bit of an infancy at this point in time. Still Windows struggles in some respect, and not all game developers support it. But nevertheless, if you are looking for a HDR monitor, this might be the one for you. Now let's go into it. Now first of all, price. It goes on at around £500. On Amazon right now it's around £470. That's a lot cheaper than the 32-inch equivalent from Samsung, which comes in at around £560. Now in terms of monitor, the monitor spec, other than what I mentioned, so it's 1440p, it's got a VA curved panel with 1800R curvature, there's a 4 millisecond quoted G2G response time. In terms of inputs, it's got 2 HDMI inputs and 1 display input. It's also got USB Type-C as well, and 2 USB 3.1 Gen 1 ports if you wish to plug in some devices. Bear in mind that you will need a USB Type-C connector on your PC because there is no USB plug, if that makes sense. So your upstream cable which goes from your PC to your monitor, you'll need to have a USB Type-C of some sorts. Other than that, specs will be down in the description below. Make sure you check them out, and they're provided by BenQ. Now let's go into the build quality of the monitor. So first of all, how does it look? Now I quite like what BenQ have done with this solid metal stand underneath. It holds the monitor very well. In terms of adjustments, you've got height adjustment and tilt, but when you want to turn it around or rotate it, you won't be able to do that, so do bear that in mind. I've got no real complaints with that, to be honest, given the size of the monitor and the type of monitor. It's a curved monitor. So the curved monitor, the 1800R curvature, adds a little bit of extra immersion. To me personally, if you're sitting quite close on your desk, I don't think you're going to notice it all that much. I've mentioned that with pretty much a lot of curved monitors, but if you're sitting a little further away, then you might notice that little bit of extra immersion. BenQ have done a good job in terms of the curvature because you don't notice a tail off on the edges of the screen, so it's a great sort of implementation. And I quite like the fact they've made a 3-sided borderless design, which means you can link up a few of these and provide yourself with a more immersive sort of experience, especially if you're going to play some racing games. At the bottom you've got a nice plastic bezel, and you've got the sensor which is located under the BenQ sign. Other than that, in terms of build quality goes, the stand is strong, and it's I have no complaints. In terms of the on-screen display, I'm not a real big fan of where the positioning of the buttons are that BenQ have put them, and that is just underneath over here, just reducing the EV of my monitor, my camera, so you can see the monitor. The button placements are under here. It's a little bit off-center. It's just a little bit odd to me. Nevertheless, the OSD is very comprehensive. You've got every sort of options that you'd want. So you can see here you've got PIP and PBB mode. In picture mode, you've got brightness, which I've got 43 at the moment. That's just for the camera to pick up, but usually I leave it 100. Rest of that, the color tone is on normal, and I've got AMA on premium, and I'll get into that in the gaming section in just a bit. Picture advanced, I've got picture mode standard. Now you can choose these to cycle them through whatever you wish. sRGB mode, strangely enough, didn't calibrate to the sRGB mode, and I'll show you why in just a bit, but I'll leave it on the standard mode if I were you. Other than that, color vibrance 10, low blue light, super resolution off, and then you've got BI plus sensor, which adjusts almost like a True Tone display on Apple devices. You'll have it in some sort of similar way from BenQ, and that's with that sensor which is located just under the BenQ sign over here. Nevertheless, other than that, you've got audio. Nevertheless, it's just useful to have, but not something I would personally use. Audio, there's no speakers, but you can obviously plug it via 3.5mm jack and have the audio output there. And then within the system menu, you've got the FreeSync option. Now the FreeSync option, I've got it on normal because on premium it reduces the overall refresh rate to 120 Hz, so it caps it, whereas on normal it leaves it 144 Hz. So I've left it on normal for the time being. And other than that, you can be able to see some of the other options, including the information, which gives you the optimal resolution if HDR is on and off, and then your DisplayPort version, which is on 1.4 right now. So there we go, that's the OSD. Hopefully that covers everything that you need to know about the OSD. But anyway, in terms of the actual build quality, design, everything like that, no complaints. Now let's talk about the picture quality. Now it is a HDR monitor, but first let's talk about the SDR qualities of the actual panel. So it's a VA panel running at 1440p. Now, I actually have connected via DisplayPort, and BenQ were very kind enough in order to lend me a AMD RX 550. So unlike most of my reviews where I put an NVIDIA card on it, because I wanted to test out the FreeSync 2 HDR capabilities, I needed an AMD card, and I've got the RX 550 in there. Now in terms of that, you can see that from the AMD Radeon settings, and I've got FreeSync enabled on that. Now in terms of the picture quality, I must say I was pretty impressed. Generally speaking, colors do pop. They're very slightly washed out, but overall in terms of the picture quality, the contrast ratio, especially because it's a VA panel, and the dark black tones, or even the very center weighted white tones, are all actually very good. It seems very similar to what the Samsung monitor had produced previously, and it seems like they're almost using the same quality panel. So a slightly washed out tone, not quite your IPS, your class leading IPS panel, but nevertheless in terms of overall picture quality, you get a fantastic response. So it's fantastic display, sorry. And just to prove this, I put it on a color calibrator. I got an average delta E of 1.4, which is fantastic, with a contrast ratio of over 2,600 to 1. Overall luminance is around 430, which is fine in a bright sunlit room, so I wouldn't have any problems seeing this if I had loads of sunlight coming and beaming through. As you'll be able to see probably just from the colors, I've got a lot of green over there, which is calibrated to sRGB. But when I had it on sRGB mode, as I showed you through the OSD, suddenly I got a lot of colors skewing out. So it didn't really make sense to me, and even the delta E was off for it. So as I said, like even to my own eyes, I preferred using on normal mode rather than on sRGB mode. But nevertheless, it's just up for, it's your call, it's for you to choose. Now in terms of the actual uniformity of the display, it does a decent job but not fantastic. It's great along the bottom, well generally speaking, but then you've got a variance at the a bit at the top, so about -15%, plus 4%, and -11%. So it's a little bit not too uniform in terms of the display. So it's worth bearing that in mind if you're going to be using this for color editing or video editing. In terms of backlight bleed, I didn't notice any sort of backlight bleed. There's no problems in terms of that, so no complaints to report. Now let's get into gaming performance. Now in terms of gaming, I used it on HDR and SDR modes, but as this is a HDR display, I think it's much more interesting to actually test out its HDR capabilities. So for this I use Shadow Warrior 2 in order to conduct my tests. Now just to show you over here, you've got HDR enabled over here with the gamma at 0.65. If I were to disable HDR and apply it, or actually in order to apply it, then you'll be able to see that at the bottom right hand side of the screen, a little pop-up comes up and it says FreeSync 2 HDR on. If you were to disable that, then it will say it is off. So in terms of Shadow Warrior 2, this is the settings that I normally use in order to get the best results. But what I've noticed with HDR, at least on this game, is that it really sharpens up the detail, especially around the sword. So if you look at the hand over here and the sword, it looks a lot more defined than it would be on SDR. And I'll show you in just a bit how the SDR version looks. I just want to point out some bits so you guys can refer and even rewind back on the video. But if you look at the building over here, the red colors are kind of popping out in color, whilst the green foliage over here looks really nice. It is very well defined as well, and it does kind of contrast off the little lion over here. Now if I were to turn off HDR and also increase the gamma to 1, which is the default set by the game developers, and apply that, suddenly you'll see that the colors really do pop out a little bit more. However, that's not to say they're as accurate or as the game developer designed them to be. So straight away over here you can see that the hand looks a little bit off and looks a little bit more shining when it shouldn't be, and that's just due to the sunlight coming in. The sword doesn't have that same sort of reflection. The building in the middle kind of has the greens and reds kind of merge into the wooden shed over here, and there's not that much of a contrast in terms of difference between the line over here and the building. So that's the things that you should really look out for. So as I said before, HDR is kind of in its still in its infancy, but there are benefits to be had, especially if you're going to be using it, let's say, with a games console and not for PC. Then suddenly the HDR benefits will be absolutely apparent as soon as you switch on your console. But in my case, I'm a hashtag PC Master Race gamer, so when I come to my tests, I use them with a PC and with certain things that I can test with. So for example, Shadow Warrior 2. So those are the HDR benefits. So what about the SDR? Now, if you take HDR out of the equation and talk about actual normal gaming to see how it performs, I usually come to Dust 2 and have harmless bots come up to me and test the responsiveness and the input lag of the monitor. Now, in terms of the overall response time on the monitor, now I showed before that the AMA is on premium, and that's because I didn't notice any sort of overshoot ghosting, or at least any really noticeable overshoot ghosting that occurs with the setting set to premium. Usually when you set it to the highest level, so for example premium, you notice a lot of overshoot ghosting, but that's not the case. So thankfully on this monitor you can use it on that premium setting and yet experience the best response times that you can achieve from the monitor, so you don't have to dial it down in order to get a more visually beautiful experience. And in terms of that, in terms of response time monitor, it's absolutely acceptable for a large screen monitor. It's not quite up there with the top gaming monitors to be a competitive monitor, so I wouldn't use this if you're playing Counter-Strike kind of religiously. But if you're playing games like, let's say, Fortnite, which are a little bit more casual, and no, that's not a dig at Fortnite players, it's generally just if you're playing a game like Fortnite that doesn't require every pixel to be perfect, then this monitor will be perfectly suited for you. So I would use this for semi-competitive play on, say, games like Counter-Strike, or use it for casual gaming. In terms of input lag, it's again average. It's not the best, it's not the fastest input lag that I've noticed, but yet it's still very good. So in terms of my overall gaming experience with SDR and even HDR capabilities, this monitor does a great job. It's perfectly suited for gamers who play casually, and that said, who want to dip into competitive play, they can do so, but bear in mind that you will be better off buying a actual ultra responsive or really impressive IPS panel, so ultra responsive TN panel, or a very impressive IPS panel. So that's my overall opinions in terms of gaming, which leads me on to my conclusion. This monitor does it all. At around £500 or under £500, it offers everything that you'd really want from a monitor. It's got the HDR capabilities, it's got a large 32-inch display, which is also curved, it's got the VA color reproduction and the fantastic contrast ratio that you'd expect from such a panel. It's got AMD FreeSync 2, it's also certified by the display standards of VESA of HDR 400, which means that it is an actual HDR display. It's not a fake HDR, which a lot of manufacturers did in the past. And better still, it's got 1440p and it runs 144 Hz with a relatively acceptable input lag and response time for your normal games, so not your typical competitive games like Counter-Strike. So that's pretty much it. I mean, there's everything going for it, and there's very little that's going against it. It has everything that you'd expect from a class-leading monitor. And I could definitely suggest it if you're in the market for a HDR monitor and don't want to be spending that extra about 100 odd pounds for the Samsung monitor, which is pretty much almost equivalent to this monitor, then I would highly suggest getting this BenQ instead. Now you might wonder, why would you ever pay extra for that Samsung monitor? Well, Well, it's got the quantum dot technology, which gives you a little bit better color reproduction. It's a slightly more responsive panel, so it will be more suited for competitive gamers. So those are the plus points of the Samsung, and that's the extra price you'd be paying for that. If you're not interested in what I just said, then this BenQ is a fantastic alternative and among the very best gaming monitors, at least at the current time, for that have HDR, have the actual certified HDR standard. So there we go, guys. I've been Totally Dubbed. Hopefully you enjoyed this review. Make sure you give it a like, comment, subscribe. Let me know in the comments below what you think about the monitor or generally of the HDR monitors in the market right now. And if you're thinking about buying one, or if you got any questions, just pop them down. Alright guys, I've been Totally Dubbed. Take care and bye-bye.